Hi, I'm Lanny and this is Preserving Today, a Greener Postures project. Alright, in this video I'm going to show you my 10 steps for making sourdough bread. We're going to go through all of them. First, feed the starter, then mix the dough, build your gluten, bulk ferment, shape, cold proof, preheat your oven, score the bread, bake the bread, and cool it. First, feed your starter 10 to 12 hours before you want to start your dough. You want your starter to have doubled in size and be nice and bubbly. Then, mix the dough. Measure all your ingredients and mix until there are no dry pockets. Cover and rest for 30 minutes to an hour for your flour to fully hydrate. And let's walk through those steps now. First, I take my digital food scale, I place a bowl on top and I hit the tare button to bring it to 0, and I add 700 grams of water, then 100 grams of my active fed sourdough starter, 20 grams of salt, 20 grams of avocado oil. Then I use 250 grams of Fairhaven Mill wheat bread flour and 750 grams of King Arthur white bread flour. I mix things really well with my dough whisk, and if you haven't tried a dough whisk before and you're making bread, this thing is really useful and I'm super glad that I bought it. It was cheap, and I'll put a link in the description. After mixing well, I'm covering this and I'm gonna set my timer for 30 minutes. So after 30 minutes, I'm coming back to my dough and I'm going to do my first stretch and fold. I used cold water on my hands so that the dough doesn't stick, and I carefully pull up one section of the dough and place it over the top. And I do that again, rotating the bowl and moving around the ball of dough, pulling up and stretching it over. And I'm going to wait another 30 minutes or up to an hour. Now for my second stretch and fold, I do the same thing. I get cold water in my hands, I pull up on each side and place it over itself. Stretch and fold it over itself. Next, I'm gonna flip this whole ball over and do a coil fold, which I'm gonna just pick up kind of from the center of the dough and carefully tuck each side underneath it. And I'm going easy here so I don't tear the dough. I'm covering and resting for another 30 minutes. And back for my third stretch and fold with the cold water on my hands, and then a coil fold a couple of times, and you can see how much stretchier this is now. Again, covering it for another 30 minutes, and back for the fourth time, I'm gonna do some coil folds. This is getting really stretchy, and I know I do this in a messy way. It looks clumsy, but it's really fun, and this is so much better than the old-fashioned way I learned to make bread with normal yeast, where I would knead it on the countertop and have to make a mess with flour. I'm just using water on my hands and keeping it in the same bowl. It's not messy, and here I am just making this coil fold, watching it stretch and kind of wrapping around itself. At this point, it's been 2 hours since mixing the dough. Okay, so I'm gonna cover it and rest again. Now I'm gonna do a little quick test to see how my gluten development is going, and this is oftentimes called the window pane test. I'm just gonna pull up a section of the dough and try to stretch it out thin enough that I can see light through it. And here you can see it's pretty stretchy, but I'm also getting some tears. So I'm gonna continue doing my stretch and folds or coil folds and check back in a half an hour. Now I'm gonna cover it again and wait another 30 minutes. I'm gonna test the gluten again, and this is much better. But since I'm already here, I'm gonna do one more coil fold anyway, and then I'm gonna call it good. This has been 3 hours since we first mixed the dough, and now we're done with their gluten development phase. Now we're on to the next step, bulk ferment. Cover and let sit undisturbed at room temperature for 8 to 12 hours. It should nearly double in size, smell pleasantly sour, and have lots of bubbles on the surface. As you can see, there are some cute little bubbles on the surface here, and this has grown quite a bit. So the next step is to shape. I'm gonna flip the dough onto a floured surface and then split it into two. I'm gonna shape, creating surface tension, and move to floured baskets and cover with plastic. I'm gonna use some all-purpose flour on the surface of my cutting board. Now I'm turning the bowl over and just letting it drop out. I did loosen the edges here, and then the rest is done by gravity. I'm gonna flour a little line down the middle of the dough and use my bench scraper to cut in half. Again, product link in the description. So shaping, there's an art to it, and you can watch some more direct videos showing you how to shape. I don't have one yet, but as you can see here, I'm basically just folding this and rolling it and then using this tension of the dough on the surface of the cutting board to kind of pull it across itself. The point of doing this is to create tension in the surface of the dough. That's going to help your dough rise and be a nice fluffy loaf. So you don't want to tear it here, and you don't want to put in too much strain on it. And it doesn't actually matter how pretty it looks right now as much as it does that it has a good surface tension. So then I flip this into the basket with the seam side up, and I'm going to do what's called stitching, where I pull the dough from either side over itself, kind of like making a zipper. And the reason I'm doing that is to tighten the loaf even further. It won't be perfect and it might not stay, and that's just fine. And you can see me do that again on the second loaf. The next step is to cold proof. You just move these loaves in their baskets into the fridge for 4 to 24 hours. So the next step is simple. I just preheat my oven, but I'm going to do this with my Dutch oven inside. So I place my Dutch oven with the lid on empty in the oven at 450 degrees, and I preheat that for at least an hour. Okay, next step is to score. Flip the loaves out onto parchment paper, and using a razor blade or a sharp knife, cut a large slash into the dough and make it as fancy or as simple as you want. So I flip the loaves out and I dust off the excess rice flour, and I score a deep line at an angle on the right side of each loaf. And I did the wheat score on one of my loaves, and the wheat score is just done with a more gentle motion and not as deep of cuts. I have 2 kinds of blades. I like them both, and I'll definitely put the links for those in the description as well. On to the next step, baking. Move the loaves into your Dutch oven, cover, bake 25 minutes at 450 degrees. Then remove the lid and bake 25 minutes more, or until the crust is as dark as you like it. So after 25 minutes is up, I remove my Dutch oven and take the lid off, and that's where you can see your oven spring. So that's how much your loaf is going to rise. It's a beautiful thing, getting a sneak peek at how your loaf is going to turn out at this point. When they go back in, they do go in without the lids on. And the timer goes off after 25 more minutes, and I pull my loaves out and they look beautiful. I always tap on the bottom of my loaf and I want to hear a hollow sound. That means the inside isn't wet and doughy still. I move my loaves to a wire rack. These have a good rise, a nice crust, and a beautiful ear. That's the little ridge that stands up on the part that we scored. Now, I know this sounds silly, but the next step is to cool. Yes, it's a really important step. The loaf is still cooking. Cool for at least 1 hour, but 2 or 3 would be even better. Go ahead and cut in after you're done admiring your whole loaf, and then you get the beautiful crumb shot. This is a nice open crumb with a crispy crust. It's flexible. It'll make great sandwich bread. It's not doughy or gummy. Now I'm going to add a lot of grass-fed butter and give this a try. It's so good. If I can do this, you can do this. With a little trial and error and a lot more trial, you can make sourdough bread in your own home kitchen. I hope you found this helpful to see how I make sourdough bread in my home kitchen. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I'm Lanny, and this was Preserving Today, a Greener Pastures project.
A new podcast from the creator of the Preserving Today YouTube channel, the Greener Pastures Podcast. Available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. A show about homesteading, homemaking, and autonomous living. Learn more at greenerpastures.com/podcast. Greener Pastures. Grow, build, raise, learn, share.